Good evening. I'll call to order the workshop for the Arvada City Council for April 8th, 2019. Call upon Kristen Rush to do the roll call. Here. Here.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Here.
Councilmember Ford.
Here.
Councilmember Jones.
Here.
Councilmember McGough.
Here.
Councilmember Miller.
Here.
So, Mr. Devon, we've got 5 different items for tonight. You want to lead us off?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we'll have the street maintenance program, and Director of Public Works, Bert Knight, will start that presentation.
Yeah, this is really timely. Both Mr. Pfeiffer and I were at a joint meeting with Dr. Cog reps and Metro Mayor's Caucus on this very topic item.
Yep.
And sort of comparing notes between various communities in terms of how we're doing and how much money we need to spend. So, with that.
Yeah, it's pretty staggering. Mayor, council, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. Our streets are our largest asset that the city has, and we're going to dig into them a little bit today. So our agenda that we're going to go through is we're going to talk about what's in streets maintenance, street surface rating, that's our PCI rating, maintenance approaches, some changes we've implemented, and then a summary of what we've found in looking into it a little bit deeper, and then some funding options and some direction. So our street maintenance program includes street surface. Tonight we're going to talk predominantly about the PCI rating. It also includes concrete, but it includes also traffic control devices. We fund those out of our traffic funding, so it's not part of our streets funding, but it is a key component to what we're doing out there. So back in 1970, the program PAVER, which is what we use to develop our surface rating, it was developed by the Department of Defense and the FAA, and it was used predominantly for runways, to basically evaluate runways to make sure that they're safe. We've got 1,586 miles of street miles, lane miles in our system. We've added 62 since 2015 is when we did the last assessment. We've updated the condition scores and provided some management scenarios with the help of PAVER as we analyze our system. So this is a couple ways of looking at our system. On the left, they're telling the same information. It's just 2 different ways of looking at it. On the left, you see bar chart. On the right, you see the pie chart. What I'm trying to tell you is we've got about 137 miles of arterial roadways. We've got about 351 miles of collector streets and almost 1,100 miles of local roadways and streets. So when we do a surface analysis, the PCI analysis, Pavement Condition Index, which we use in PAVER, it goes out and it looks at distress types. It uses let me back up, it uses a vehicle to go out and assess it. It's got a whole bunch of cameras on it. I think there's about 7 cameras, 3 of them looking down, forward, backwards, to the sides. And it looks at distress of the surface of the roadway, and then also tries to quantify how much of that distress is in a section of roadway that we determine, and then calculate the severity of the distress. And that's how you get your PCI, and it goes into a rating of 7 different levels, good being the best, failed being the worst. And as you go through, as you can see, if you're kind of in those bright colors and you're probably in an area that starts to add a little bit of cost to your system. So what does that look like? So the PCI of 70 up in the upper left-hand corner, that's a newer street, and we can get by with crack repair, crack sealing, patching, some seal coat, maybe a chip seal in this area. You get a little bit more distress. PCI of 50, you can see that we've been crack sealing, but we're probably going to have to do chip seals on that section, or we'll have to do a mill and an overlay. As you get down to 10, you're getting to the point to where you don't have as many tools in your toolbox, and you're going to have to do a mill and overlay or reconstruct. And if we drop down to 5, that's failed, and your only choice there is to go reconstruct that street. So here's what we found in our PCI rating for 2018. We started doing this in 2012, and we've retained using the same data and the same company as we've gone through to make sure we've always got apples to apples. And so as we see, 2012 we had a 62.2 system PCI. 2015 we increased it, and this year we got a 68.15.
Bert, if I could interrupt you, are we looking at every lane mile in the city when we
Yes,
do
we
this?
are.
Very good.
We are.
May I ask you a question as well? We have these PCI rating numbers that are overall for all the different types of streets we have. Do you have them individually within those categories as well? So in other words, our PCI rating of our arterials in 2012, 15, and 18, and our collectors in 12, 15, and 18, and then our neighborhood streets. So we know not only where the PCI has changed, but what type of street has changed on. Because I believe, haven't we focused our maintenance around
Arterials and-
busier streets?
Yes. That's what we've really focused on. I do have that data,
Okay.
but not with me tonight.
Okay.
I think we'll be able to look at a map and kind of get a sense of it as we work through. But at 68.15, we're making some real headway. But I'm going to show you a little bit of a different way of looking at it. What I've done here is we've taken it to where we look at our portfolios of some things that influence this, because we do all streets, new streets that have developers built and then dedicated to the city or transferred them to the city's ownership are also in here. And so the new streets are going to be up in the good category. And so if we look at it in portfolio, let's use it 2012, for example. We've increased that portfolio of 2012 streets from 62.2 to 62.88. So we've gained, but we haven't gained kind of what the other chart was showing us. So here's
So the new streets are bringing up the average, is what you're saying?
New streets are bringing up the average. That's exactly it, Mayor. And so if we look here, if you can see this map and zoom into it, you'd see that the arterials are actually in pretty good condition. They're not good, or not all of them are in good, but they're in better condition than some of the areas that we get into older Arvada and off to the east side that you're starting to see those real bright colors. And as we look to our newer development, those are in pretty good shape. So one of the things that we had as a benefit for us is in, excuse me, I've got a little bit of a cold, but from 2000 to about 2012, we were basically living with a budget of about $2 million. 2011, we started adding some one-time funds. In 2012, we added some more one-time funds, but we started then kicking in some increases to our streets budget. That's the red that you see that continues, that's the ongoing. Then we did it again in 2016, 16, and then also in 17. And you can see we hit some pretty high numbers in 2017 and 18 to where we were up closer to, I think, about 13 or 14 million. It was quite a bit. And then our current budget for 2019 for the street system is 9.6. But as you can see, with council really kind of leading the way, we found ways to put money into our system. here's the same budget information. As you can see, the bars, the blue bars are total budget. The red line is asphalt. And as you can see, concrete plays a big part in this. When we go in and we do rehabilitation, we go in and we replace damaged concrete, and then we pave whatever treatment we're going to do in behind it. And so you can see the significant years there in 2017, 18, and then you can see this year. And then what we've done is just forecasted a 3% gain out to 2023. But the green triangles are our PCI rating with the 2012 portfolio. That's the 2012 streets, kind of transferred that information if we just use those streets of what our PCI rating would be. As you can see, we're essentially treading water. It's a good thing that Arvada City Council and our community said, let's put some more money in here, because it would be kind of shocking to see where it could have been. So thank you.
So I have a question about that chart, though.
Yes, sir.
If we doubled our budget from 16 to 17 and did a PCI in 18, the needle didn't really move, but yet we doubled it. So trying to understand how we doubled our budget and the needle didn't move on that.
What we have is we'll find later, is we have a lot of streets that are at a point to where all you can do is go in and rehab them, basically reconstruct them.
And so it eats up the budget
And so
faster.
it eats up the budget. That's one factor. The second one is we have been focusing on some arterials in the last few years. And those are big, expensive streets to fix.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you, sir. Do you have a map of all of the streets in serious condition and when they might be fixed? Like, do you have a map with dates and years, and maybe sometime in the next decade we'll get to this street? Or I say that in jest, but I'm just,
Yeah.
we do, I'm on the east side, and we have all the dark red streets.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering if there's a time frame for the city, what does that look like?
It's a two-part answer in that, yes, we do. We try to run it out within about a 5-year time frame. 10 years is getting pretty sketchy as you're looking out, because streets do deteriorate. And so it's a constant maneuvering of how they're attacked. Yours may be the #1 street in the city, but then 2 years later, there may have been a street that deteriorated worse that took you out of the #1 spot.
Sure.
That, coupled with budget, matters on how quickly we can get to these streets.
Okay.
Mr. Jones?
Oops,
Sorry.
not a problem.
And you may touch on this, you may not, but with regard to the metro districts that have been established within the city, what part does the metro district play in the infrastructure, the streets, long-term? Or are those ultimately turned over and then become part of your budget and city's budget?
They're turned over to the city. The metro districts, with the developer through the development agreement, build the streets, and then they're turned over to us at acceptance of the streets.
So, which is why, as you mentioned earlier, those newer streets are bringing the PCI index up. And that may be another reason why the needle hasn't moved,
Yeah,
because those new streets are keeping that PCI
yeah,
to where it's not necessarily going the right direction. It's going up, but because they're all new streets. Okay.
correct.
Wait, point of clarification, this chart here is not with new lane miles.
Excuse me?
This is not with new lane miles.
No, the PCI rating on that one is with the 2012 portfolio. That's the green triangles.
Yeah, which is
Councilmember.
not the new development
Oh, okay.
roads.
And so that's why we're seeing 62.2 to 62.88 in 2018. However, the PCI of 2018, if we include those new roadways.
Jumps up a lot.
68
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay, Mr. McGough?
Yes, thank you. I was just noticing here that 30, 35, 40% of the budget is not going to asphalt, but to the other things, the traffic
It's
control?
no, it's going to concrete.
Going to concrete, just concrete?
Concrete.
So this is not the
Yes, sir.
traffic control devices?
Yes.
So concrete is costing us half as much as the asphalt?
Yeah, concrete's expensive.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Oh, let me just ask something. Would we expect as we increase our PCI that that ratio might stay the same? So we're spending,
That's how we forecasted it,
okay, so,
is to try to just gauge them both moving together.
okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
So what we're seeing a little bit is this thing called backlog, which is if I take my 2019 budget, if I take my 2019 budget and I'm looking at it, I've got a system need of $58 million. Excuse me, system need of $67.5 million. We've got around a $10 million, just under a $10 million budget. So what you see there in 2019 is the green is what or the blue is what I can budget. The rest of that cost is what we call backlog, which means I'm kicking the can forward into future years. So I take that 58 million, take it into 2020, end up with a total of about $73 million worth of need that I could identify just to go fix. Again, if I have a budget of around $10 million, I just keep growing that backlog. And that's a little bit of what we're up against. That's one of the reasons that we've seen a lot of investment that we've made kind of just is good investment, and you've stabilized our PCI to some degree, but we're really not gaining the headway that we were hoping we would. And so that backlog will continue. What you'll also see, though, is the red is different from year to year because that goes into our analysis to where there's some streets that are going to drop into more expensive fixes as we move forward. And so it's almost like a compounding interest type situation with this backlog. So we've increased our investment. We've kind of buoyed where we're at. Now what do we do? Well, that's what I've challenged my team with, my asphalt team with, and we've come up with some ideas that we would like to present. And so the first thing that we want to talk about, and I know that you've seen this lots of times, this is with the rating on the left side. It's got the asphalt curve going down to where you get about 25 years out of a street. And then there's that area that's the critical range. That's if I can catch stuff in that red range or the critical range before we hit PCI of 50, I can do more cost-effective maintenance in that area or above it. If I drop below that 50, it starts to limit the things that I can do, and they're more expensive. I think we show on this that it's about $1 per linear foot if I can stay above that, and it drops down to $8 to $10 a linear foot when I go below it. So as we look at that, here's kind of that same chart to where up at the top, I can do some crack sealing. I can do surface seal coats. I can do a chip seal, a slurry seal. But then when I start to run down it, I start to limit myself to overlays, some heavier surface treatments, mill and overlay, and then eventually reconstruction. So the differences that we're looking at is if I can stay in that upper end, I can do some pretty cost-effective maintenance. Chip seal is about $19,000 a mile on a roadway. If I get down to reconstruction, it's up over $200,000. So again, and we'll go through this one fairly quickly because it's just telling a story. Here's that street curve of where it's a new street. It's up at a PCI rating of 100. As it starts to age, it starts to see the problems. And it'll last me about 25 years before it starts to get to a point that nobody can drive on it. It's back to almost gravel. So I do go in there and I do a crack seal. I catch it fairly early, about 5 years, kick that curve out to the right a little bit. Get in there, I do some surface sealing, some rehab in some degree. And I can kick that time frame out quite a bit further to the right with very cost-effective maintenance. I can continue that. I can get that life of the street out 50 years plus with fairly cost-effective maintenance, and I'm keeping that PCI up at a fairly high level. If I don't do that, what happens is I have to take this red line approach to where I let the street degrade down to a point that I have no choice except to go in and reconstruct it and kind of get to the same time frame. The difference in cost of these, if I do that cost-effective maintenance, even with a fairly significant, not a fairly significant, but going in and doing an overlay at one point, I can spend about $179,000 doing that street. And I've kept my PCI rating above a 60. If I allow it to degrade at about that 20-year time frame, I've got to go in and reconstruct it. And from the chart you saw, that was $214,000 for that mile. But I've also lived with PCI rating below that for quite some time.
Mr. Fiver.
I think you answered my question, but I want to make sure I understood it. So, it would be nice to see kind of what the cost of this one lane mile would have been if you followed your first situation, which you kind of said it. What was it?
Yeah.
How much was that total?
179,000.
So 179 to kick it out a little bit and do this up and down for a while, staying above 60-ish until the light purple.
Yeah.
So that's 169, you said? How much? 100?
Well, it's 179,000 to do it from year 1 out to year 45.
Okay.
So it's out the whole way.
And then you said if we followed the first green line and then jumped up and did reconstruction, that's 214 because
Yeah.
didn't you do it?
And I've lived with that lower PCI rating, rougher street, more damage to it. And it's hard to tell how far you can kick these things out. I don't know that there's really good data showing how long we can make streets last
Okay.
with this approach.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Ford.
Oops.
Bert, question on street construction. Have there been any major changes in street construction from years past to today that would change lifespan at all of streets?
Yes and no.
Or in fact degrade the lifespan?
There's been changes in approaches to design, in improvements to design, but the big offset to that is I think our materials are not as good as they were probably 50 years ago. There was a lot more oil in asphalt 50 years ago than there is today. And, you know, dang good thing, because some of these older streets, if they'd had the same levels of asphalt that we do today, it might have been a different story. That doesn't mean that we're not building them well. We're building them really well. But the materials that you have available are just not the same as they were 50 years ago, even 30 years ago.
So we can expect then that the streets today that are being built are going to degrade faster?
From a gut level, yes, I would think they probably will. I think there's what we call wrap, which is some filler material in the asphalt that you didn't see 30 to 50 years ago. Hard to tell. I mean, time is a true test.
So really, we could be in
Yeah.
worse shape in the future.
Could hold up. I mean, we've improved our designs as we've moved forward too.
Okay, thank you.
So here's what we're doing this year, and this is a change. Previously, we did a lot of reconstruction, and we're really focused on reconstruction. We did some maintenance, but in 2019, we made a strategic choice to where we're going to do this current program to where about half of our money is going to be on the reconstruction and the heavy maintenance costs, and we're going to spend about half of our money really trying to do that cost-effective maintenance. Try to keep streets from falling into that where you have no choice except to reconstruct. Struggle with that is there's a lot of backlog. If we look at the model program, what we see is something that's more of a evenly cut pie to where we see the cost-effective maintenance really kicking things out quite a ways to where you're not really spending nearly as much of your money in street reconstruction. So that's what we're shooting for. Our current program, I think it's going to have a good impact for us, but we do have a lot of streets out there that their only answer is reconstruction. And so as you see, as we move to the model program, the rehabilitation, which is the street reconstruction, would go down. So that's a little bit of what I was talking about here is in 2019, our concrete program is moved into a cluster approach. What we're trying to do is go into some of our local roadways because that's the point that we're at now. And we want to do them more in a group type of approach than spread all around the city because we think we can get better value that way. 2020 will be the paving of those roadways. So we think we'll get decreased cost with mobilization. We think we'll impact an area all in 1 year to where it's not like we're on one street this year and the next street the following year. It's going to help us with our efficiency when we go out to do these cost-effective treatments. And I think it's going to be better for our future maintenance programs. So here's the clusters that we're looking at for our concrete program in 2019. That's a view of the city, and as you see, it's on the east side of Arvada with a little bit, the area that you see is from Wright's Nursery over to Ralston Road is in the center there, north of Allendale. Everybody's staring at the screen, trying to figure out where it is. But so kind of the summaries of what we have and what we found is we have moved the needle. If we include the new streets, it's pretty substantial moving of the needle to 68.2. But if we look at that 2012 portfolio, 62.9, 62.88, I think was the real number. And then we drop down as we look back to 2015. And so the thing that I do know is with our current funding of 9.6, it's a good amount of money that we're doing. We're going to direct more of that money to that cost-effective maintenance, about half of it, but we're also going to see that backlog increase because we just don't have enough money to get rid of some of those roadways that we just need to go rebuild. So as we look at this, these are some of the options, some of the scenarios that we can run out in paver. If we look at our budget, the red line, and we increase it 3% annually, what we'll do is we'll see our budget with its increasing. We've got a backlog. I was using 2020 as just a point because we've already made some choices of what we're going to do in 19 and 20 as far as concrete. But 2020 asphalt on, We see a backlog of 72 million grow to about 146 in 10 years. That's with the start date of 2020. I did catch an editing error that I had on the green line is if we targeted a PCI of 70, we're going to spend almost $17 million to try to hold it there. And we'll see a backlog in 2020 of 61.2, not 91, increase to, let me get the real number here. Increase to 66.1. So it's not increasing dramatically with that center approach, but it's still increasing, and you still have 66 million in backlog after 10 years. If we take an approach to where we just say, dang it, we're going to get all those streets that we need to reconstruct, and we're going to get things in a situation to where we eliminate this backlog, we could do it in 10 years. We'll have to spend almost $20 million, 19.5, and that includes concrete, to eliminate that backlog. So what does eliminating the backlog do for us? We'll be able to hold the PCI up around probably 85 overall for the system, because we're going to be playing in that area above 50 and hopefully up substantially higher than that. Cost-effective maintenance. We'll be able to double the life of a street, or at least double the life of a street. And then we'll have our backlog eliminated in a 10-year time frame. And what we've shown by our analysis is we could actually get by with about an 8 to 10 million annual maintenance budget if you don't have that backlog. Well, how would we do that? Or which approach would we take? We can continue to do what we're doing, and we can maybe create something to where we direct access any additional revenues that we can find into our street maintenance program. That's what we've been doing. Or we can identify 70 as the PCI that we want to hit, figure out how to do 17 million a year, or we can try to eliminate that backlog. That's, again, about a $10 million increase over our current budget. So rather than just throw those out and not come up with some ideas, that's what we're trying to do here. One is we can continue to do what we're doing to where we actually direct a minimum amount of excess revenues to go to the street funding. Or we can have something to where we do step approaches similar to what we have been doing to our budget over the next 10 years. The challenge with that is I think we've been on an upswing for 10 years, and we're surely going to get something that kind of sets us back, and I'm sure that the city has other needs, which as we dedicate more money to streets, it's got to come from somewhere. I know Mr. Archer's pretty magic, but he's not that magic. Or you can tell us to figure out a way that we could go out and approach our citizens again and ask for maybe a 10-year sunset to dedicate funding to our street system for that 10 years. With that, any other questions?
Mr. Marriott.
Yeah, I have a question. So if you had $20 million next year to spend on streets, can the private sector take that money at that quantity, or is there a length of time it would take to build up the contractors who do most of the work, their capacity to do that much more work?
That's a good question. We'd be in some pretty good competition. Colorado Springs, I think, has got a $50 million a year program. Some of that is not all asphalt. Fort Collins is very dedicated to attacking, but I believe we could find ways to do it. We would, again, be doing one of the things that you're going to see April 15th is we're taking, and we'll contract out our mowing out of our street maintenance fund to a guy that does mowing every day, and we'll take those resources that we have as far as staffing, and we're going to do crack sealing. We're going to do some seal coating. So we're going to be building up our opportunities also to make sure that we can do that lower cost street maintenance for when that day is done.
Right, okay. Let me ask you another question. You just mentioned Colorado Springs and that they've got a $50 million street maintenance program. Any idea how many lane miles they have by comparison to Arvada?
You know, I don't
No
know.
idea.
I don't
Okay.
know.
And-
It's larger than Arvada, I'm sure.
Yeah, and do we know, I think this gets back to the point the mayor and Mr. Pfeiffer brought up about what some of the other similar age suburbs like to us, you know, what they're spending per lane mile or anything like that? Do we have any kind of comparative analysis besides just this PCI?
I don't have it in lane miles. I do have, lane miles is not a consistent number across every organization.
I mean, just the way they measure them?
Yeah,
Okay.
sometimes. It's the width of the street, of how they look at it. But, for example, Wheat Ridge has 133 miles. I'm sure that that's just straight center line miles. They spend about $2 million.
Mm-hmm.
I've driven down through there. They're fighting the same fight that we are. Westminster, they've got 1,100, what they call lane miles. We really couldn't get them to tell us how much they're spending. We look at Lakewood, I can't find what they're really defining as lane miles, but they're spending about $2 million.
Okay. Let me ask you one other question. It seems to me that some of this whole conversation around PCI index really needs to be indexed to the type of street it is.
Yeah.
In my neighborhood, there's a number of streets that I'm sure would fall into that poor, extremely poor category or failed category or whatever. But because these are neighborhood streets where, one, you're going a very slow speed when you drive it, and they don't have much traffic on them past the residents who live there, it's not really significant that they've got, you know, less than the PCI rating or the quality of road that we would like. But yet, when you get out on, you know, 72nd or Ralston Road or, you know, Kipling, any of these other, you know, streets where the speeds are higher, the traffic is greater, they're the ones that get you, that may want to have a different standard. Have you looked at any kind of trying to break this down maybe a little further rather than just an overall umbrella, here's kind of what we're looking, but having maybe separate goals for our arterials, our collectors, and our neighborhood streets, and kind of look at them as individual groups instead of just one group?
We've talked about that, but you run into the same scenario with all of them. PCI rating is a tool. It is not the only tool. We've got a lot of stuff when we're looking at streets. It's just one that you can gauge and you can forecast with. But the challenge is when you, and PCI rating is the same approach for a local roadway as it is for arterial. I know that you know that.
Right.
But what I'm trying to get to here is when I let that street fall below a certain level of PCI rating, my options of repairing that street or improving that street are very limited and very expensive.
Right, but is I guess maybe let me ask it a different way. Is the degradation of these types of streets shouldn't be, I would think, on the same rate? In other words, a neighborhood street with far less traffic ought to take a lot longer to really fall off the table into a really, really bad condition than a street that gets lots more traffic.
With lots of trash trucks.
Yes, yeah.
And Amazon delivery trucks, don't forget.
Well, I think your question is would I allow an arterial roadway or a collector roadway to fall to a PCI rating of, say, 30 or 20 to where that may be something I could live with on a local roadway for a period of time. No, I would not allow those main roadways to fall to that level. And I think that's what you've done with the previous funding, is we had some arterials that were getting in some pretty chippy, I guess I'll say, or poor condition, and we really increased the budget and focused on those, to the detriment of some local roadways falling even further.
I think that's all I have for now. I might have a comment again later.
Okay.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Pfeiffer?
I'll take a third bite at his apple. Let me word his question again. The trajectory in which the degradation he's referring to, I'm assuming from an asset perspective, you would know when one asset's going to fail sooner than the other. If they're both at 70 PCI or 50,
Yeah. The
he's
arterial
saying
will go
the
first.
residential road may stay at 50 for another 10 years,
Yeah.
while another road that's heavily traveled might degrade year over year 5 points or whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Is that-
If
where you're
that's
going?
what your question is, yes,
Yeah.
that is very true.
So then, I guess the question he was leading to is the prioritization of which routes with the limited resources we have. Do you have a list of those prioritizations based on that trajectory of degradation?
We're pretty comfortable with our arterials right now.
Well, let's just look at all of the streets as a holistic.
Yeah. Does our program currently get to that level of detail? No, it doesn't. But again, PCI is a tool in the tool chest. It's not the final answer. We look at several things when we're ranking roadways as far as the types of
But you don't have
treatments that we'll
time
do.
associated to it. You don't know how long something can maintain a PCI, right?
Yeah.
That's a tool still missing in your toolbox.
Yeah.
Because there's things out there, I'll put on,
Well-
that you could use that can give you a trajectory of when you hit certain PCI levels, there should be some tool you use that says, hey, in 2025, you're going to replace I'm just going to use Dot Street. In 2023, well, or 2020, 2030, you're going to replace, such and such street. Is that a tool that we should probably invest so that helps prioritize our asset replacement?
I think we have that capability. The struggle that we're up against is we've got some streets that we have no choices to go out there and really address them, because they're getting to the point that, you guys will get a lot of phone calls if we don't.
I think what I'm struggling is just, limited resources. I think we all agree with that. There's just, it's not there, but we're also trying to be very strategic in exactly where we place every penny of the limited resources on the most beneficial and, making the asset last longer.
And don't let my answers convey that we don't. We do that. That's what Dan Pumphrey, our streets manager, with the help of our engineering team, does, to where they make strategic choices of where we need to make those investments. We work very hard at that. The challenge is that backlog item, to where you only have a certain amount of resources, and anything above that is kicking the can down the road, and there's some streets that are going.
So this goes into Ms. Miller's statement. Is there a report we would be able to see your prioritization of the roads based on all of that thought process? Like regardless of time, these are your priority routes and why?
Yeah.
Do we have such a thing?
Mr. Pfeiffer, if I could step in, we do have all the details on every street. They drive the whole city. So we have the availability to look at the rating by street, as Councilmember Miller was asking. The factor that we're missing in looking at our street ratings that both Councilmember Marriott and you were asking about is the time and when they were poured. But we do have the breakout by street, by individual lane mile driven, and their PCI rating. So there is the ability to do additional analysis. There also is an annual meeting, and it's actually done more frequently as far as discussions, but where the streets are prioritized, and that pulls in streets and engineering to do that work. And that information could be made available as far as looking at where we're at. Correct.
Yeah, that'll work. I just want to make sure we're not just looking at, I'm just trying to get a sense that we're just not looking at PCI alone.
We are
no.
not.
And that we're using every type of input to make a real strategic decision that we're doing this one block
That is
because
why,
of this reason, not just by PCI.
that is why we have the
Okay.
meetings with multiple people around the table,
Yeah.
boots on the ground, and PCI rating analysis done as well.
Okay,
Again, PCI is just a tool.
right.
The real decisions are the three guys sitting right over here.
And this budget is solely just asphalt and concrete, right? Doesn't
Correct.
deal with the operational maintenance stuff like traffic signals and those kind of things. Okay,
It's out of our traffic funding.
okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Jones?
So, is there any kind of new technology as it relates? So, you look at crack seal coat, those are things that have been done, and I don't pretend to understand how any of that works, but is there any new technology or anything new that if we made an investment in some kind of machine or something that would make it, less per lane mile to make these roads last longer, or, is there, just looking at it from a different perspective?
We haven't found them. We haven't found it yet. I mean, I think a lot of the seal coat technology, that was about 15 years ago, 17 years ago, really enhanced some of our maintenance tools. We haven't seen the next revelation of those type of approaches. But some of the things that we have done is we've looked at our system and we've determined if we can catch a street here, we can keep it from falling into a spot to where you have no choice except big money. And those are some of the maintenance choices that we're making on the cost-effective maintenance.
And then, again, from a tool perspective, if there were a way for us to, for lack of a better way to describe this, have imagery of the roads outside of the PCI study and context, is that something that would be interesting for the city to understand how that might work?
If-
And Mr. Devon, I'm setting this question up. So with regard to if there was technology that could be installed on city vehicles that would kind of give constant feedback. And the reason why I ask that is just in my industry, there is technology there that can be installed on a vehicle, on a city vehicle, on a police car, and it's just constantly capturing data about the road surface. Would that be more valuable over time, or or supplement what we're getting every other year in a PCI, or?
It's every third year. It's benchmarking. We're a data-driven organization, so we have it at the same time frame each year of those 3 years, and we go through. But, obviously, it comes down to how do you choose to do your investment. If I was going to spend $100,000 to put that technology in, the choice is I could chip seal about 5 miles of roadway. And so it becomes really kind of one of those things of, do I think that that information is going to take me to where I know more, to where I see more, to where I understand more, and I can make my maintenance dollars extend? Maybe there is.
But at some level, you may still be catching straight.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Again, just thinking of,
Yeah.
Is there other technology? Is there a better way to make or repair or maintain a road that we should be thinking about or learning about? So that's all I've got.
Can I?
Go ahead.
Can I respond to that real quick?
Sure.
My name's Shane Herrick. I'm one of the engineers that works a lot with these projects. So I want to touch a little bit back to your first question about technology. I think we're consistently looking at new technologies, talking to different cities, going to different training sessions, and there's definitely a lot of new mixed designs that are coming out with whether it's different oil content, different types of super paves that we are currently using or like an SMA type treatment. Those are definitely something we are heavily involved in, and we're definitely researching and being read in on and looking at. But yeah, there's other technologies also that for basically inventory, collection, and assessment. And those are definitely in conversation. We did try one actually last year with a smoothness spec on 58th Avenue, and you could see some grinds that we did out there because of that. That is definitely some other technology that we have been in conversation with and talking and seeing how we can utilize it. But I think we want to kind of come to an agreement as a group before we really jump on, because some of these are very expensive. And I'm definitely data oriented myself, but there is a point where there's too much data, and we want to make that smart choice and move to that next level. So if we really think that it's going to help our selection and our assessment, I think it's definitely something we'll move to. But I don't think we've come to an agreement on that yet.
Mr. Pfeiffer and then Ms. Ford.
Well, that's a good answer. So thanks for chiming in, because that's, I think, where we're going, because I've heard the same thing that Mr. Jones has, is using the technology. Now, granted, I get it, it's expensive, but it goes back to my questioning, and I'm not quite hearing it yet. So I'm hoping the answers I thought we'd hear is knowing the time in which something fails. What is the last minute before we have to do each one of your type of treatments? And the only way you're going to know that is having real data coming back that Mr. Jones is talking about, so you know your trajectory and of each road. I didn't hear that you were all accepting that statement, but I think it would be really, really smart of us with our limited resources to focus on. Granted, it's $100,000 to put them on police cars, and as they drive down and they do inventory, because I know you can do all sorts of inventory checking. You can also check your PCI with the same technology. Get all that done, and then you have a true asset management with a trajectory of when it will fail. Mm-hmm. You can have 100 roads, and 90 of them are at 50, and they'll stay at 50 for 10 years. But there's 10 that are at 50 that will be in 3 years. You want to focus on those 3, not the other. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where I'd like to see our focus is finding those out to maximize those dollars. And you probably are. I'm just not hearing it. So.
Well, I think that's exactly what we heard.
Okay.
From
Shane.
From our folks, so.
And we are doing that, and there's other factors that weigh into that. This winter is a real tough winter for streets. It's hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold.
Yeah, freeze thaw is the worst.
Yeah, I mean, freeze thaw, just back and forth. I mean, it's been a tough winter, and we're going to see it.
Mr. Mayor, if I could. I appreciate the discussion about additional data. There's a conference call I was going to participate in before it got canceled, wherein I was going to hear from a supplier that had such data that Councilmember Jones tipped me off on that I was going to look at. But I think what is the central point in this presentation is that we have a backlog of about $70 million of maintenance that's been deferred for years of underfunding that has occurred, and technically we're still underfunding, despite the fact that we have pretty much tripled our investment in streets over about the last 6 to 7 years. We are still underfunding where we need to be. What we've been able to do is isolate that backlog, and if we are able to kick our funding up to this $19.5 million a year, we would be able to eliminate that backlog and then go into a maintenance mode of spending approximately what we're spending right now, and having our streets maintain about a 80 or 85 PCI with strategically timed maintenance applications such as crack sealing and chip sealing and so forth at the appropriate time. We can probably get additional data that could be helpful, but frankly, I think it would probably tell us pretty much what we're getting told right now, that we have a backlog that's been built up over years of deferred funding. And we know that, right? And we're not alone. CDOT would tell you the same thing in terms of their level of deferred funding, and most cities in Colorado would tell you the same thing in terms of their level of deferred funding. So it's we can slice it different ways, but I think we're going to come to pretty much the same conclusion that there's a lot of streets out there that we need to spend a lot of money on in order to bring them up to a standard that we have up to this point adopted. I think that the questions about whether or not we want to consciously allow certain streets to fall to a certain PCI level, I mean, that's a fair question. Some cities have allowed certain streets to actually deteriorate basically to gravel. And then they apply gravel to address them from that point forward. I would hope we don't get to that point because I don't think our residents would like that. Councilmember McGough and I have had a couple of residents actually just contact us recently about the condition of their streets and their neighborhoods, asking when they're going to get a maintenance treatment, and Dan Pumphrey and his staff are actually working on providing answers to those two residents. So it's something that is out there, and I think residents expect that their streets would be of a quality that they would feel good about driving on them and having people over. At some point in time, I think we have to face the fact that the only way we're going to be able to deal with this is to apply some level of additional resources. However we get there, I think it's a conversation that we have to have.
Ms. Ford?
So, Bert, you mentioned a couple of cities like Colorado Springs and Fort Collins that you feel are doing a fair job in their street maintenance. Is it a relative question to ask in those cities what percentage of their budget they're spending on streets in comparison to how we're budgeting street maintenance? And
Fort Collins, they're coming up on an election to continue a sales tax funding approach to their streets. And if it passes, they will have gone through 20 years of time frame that they've been doing that. They spend, I believe, $18 million a year on street maintenance. And I'm sure that their initial intent was to get rid of the backlog. They're about 1,788 lane miles, very similar to what we are. We're 1,550 or something around there. But yeah, it's fairly dramatic of what they do. But they fund their entire maintenance program through that. If it doesn't pass, they're going to have to figure out how they do street maintenance within the general fund.
so really, I look at this situation as, I always look at things from a personal standpoint, like your house. You have cracked foundations. You either need to fix it and take the money from somewhere else and fix it because it's going to cost you more down the road, or you keep deferring it. And personally, I think it makes a lot more sense economically to fix roads at a lower cost per lane mile than at a higher cost. So if we're playing games by, holding off on certain streets, we're really not fixing the problem. We're just pushing it out and still spending more money on streets ultimately, right, per lane mile?
Yes, we would. If we don't deal with the backlog that you guys have been gifted with, what you're doing is you're deferring.
So I don't know if, we tried a tax, an increased tax in the past, and it passed, and it didn't pass. And there were comments at that point of why maybe it didn't pass. So it seems to me we're sort of looking at a hard question. Either we're going to give up some things, because obviously we gave up something. We gave up our streets for something at some point, and I don't know what that was because I wasn't here at the time, but we did. And at this point, we have to, I think as a council and as a city, decide what we want our city to look like in terms of the quality of its roads, and what are the assets that we have in the city that we want to really maintain and be known for as a city. And so, to me, to just go out and ask for more money through a tax, it failed before, so we have to understand why it failed, I think. And then, we either that, or we have to look at other possibilities, right, with the budget to see where we could cut, as we've been doing. I mean, how else do you get money, right? I'm looking at you because you're shaking your head.
I think it's important to note that we have increased our investment in streets through structural funding that has largely been generated by a very robust economic period. We've utilized one-time funds to leverage with those additional funds generated primarily through sales and use tax. So we've benefited from a very robust economic period wherein we made a conscious decision that we wouldn't use it for other things. We actually made a conscious decision, and you all made that conscious decision, that we would apply it to infrastructure. And that's what we've exactly done. That's how we've basically tripled our investment in streets over about the last 7 years. To climb the rest of this mountain, I think, would require us to look seriously at the service levels that we provide this community, particularly through the general fund, and then determine if we want to reduce those service levels in order to fund, to get to this level of funding. If we don't consider some other form of additional revenue. Now, of course, we continue to hold out hope that we will ride to victory on the shoulders of the Metro mayors and/or Dr. Cog, maybe that will happen. But when we talk about Fort Collins and Colorado Springs, both of those communities put their own ballot measures and were successful with their own ballot measures to dedicate a funding stream to take care of their streets. They did it. We weren't able to in 2016. They were able to, and that's basically the difference. Nancy, in terms of a percentage of their budget spent on streets, I'm not sure that that's the best measure. What seems to be the secret of success for communities that are doing this is that they find at least a portion of their money for street maintenance is through a dedicated funding streams. Much as like what we did for police with the police tax increment funds and other things along those lines. I'm not saying that's the only way, but it seems to be the common denominator in most communities that are doing a better job than we are, frankly, in how we're doing this. And in the case of Colorado, in the case of Fort Collins, for sure, they've done it for years, 20 years.
When they put the question on the ballot, it's solely for street maintenance. It's not for anything else associated with your street. It's not a widening, it's not for capacity, it's just street maintenance. When they did it previously and got into their 20-year time frame, they passed with it 80% approval. But it was specifically for street maintenance.
Mr. Marriott?
So let me make a couple comments. I think that this workshop illuminates what I think is one of our prime responsibilities on city council and within the city government, which is to take care of our really core areas that we form municipal governments for. Those are things like police protection, streets, water, sewer, and parks. And that those really need to or have to be our priorities. And I think the staff has done a really good job of elevating streets in that priority range without really having to make changes that would be noticeable to the residents of the city to this point. And, you know, I guess I would call it early here, but I think it shows some improving condition, which is good, but it probably also shows that it's not enough. To me, I think this is really a question of just kind of wherewithal of sticking to the priority that this is something we're going to get done. I totally understand what seems to be the path of least resistance, which is just to increase the money coming in, so then we can increase the amount going out, and all we got to do is get the voters to say yes, and all our problems are solved, and we move forward with dramatically increased spending and take care of our backlog and put us in a better place. But I don't think that necessarily, you know, just 2 years ago we did that, and the voters pretty clearly said no. You can Monday morning quarterback lots of things, but the voters pretty clearly said no. The voters also pretty clearly said no this past fall with a statewide transportation taxing scheme that would have returned money to localities too. And so I think it's very important that we look at keeping this as one of our priorities, and that we look at ways of doing it without additional contributions from the voters. Doesn't mean it's not okay to ask the voters for it, but I don't think we need to hang our hats on that being the only way we can do this, because looking at the last several elections, it looks very clear to me that the chances are not very good that the voters would say yes. I think it's a much bigger chance that the voters would say no, like they have the last couple times. And so I would point to a couple of things that may be, you know, possibilities. And I've said this before, that, you know, whether we put all or a percentage or a relatively large percentage of general fund growth towards maintenance, that's a way of kind of elevating that priority or forcing that. It's kind of the spend on this first program. We have also, you know, possibilities with the starting to be collection of online sales taxes that may or may not already within the last few years certainly has started returning some money to the city, which I think is largely being spent on road maintenance. So I'm not saying we're doing anything wrong, but that we just, you know, have to make it a priority to continue down that pathway. We also have, this is out a little bit further, but I believe we will see a benefit, you know, to the general fund or to the city fund in general with our urban renewal efforts. That, you know, our urban renewal areas are kind of in the middle or past the middle of their lifespan, and at some point we'll be returning significant funds back to the city as opposed to the Urban Renewal Authority, which is exactly what those areas are designed to do, and that's a little bit ways off. But when you start looking at all these different approaches for continually increasing our streets maintenance, that I get the backlog and the backlog grows, but I also get that if you spend more each year than you did the previous year, you may not get there as fast as you want to or as you could, but that you will get there, and that it takes will by us to make that the priority. And at some point we may be making really hard decisions about things that do interact with our citizens, that are valuable to some citizens, to continue with this as a priority. But to me, this is one of my 4 main things the city should do, and I think it's absolutely important that we keep this a priority and continue to find a way to spend more each year and get to that spot that we need to get. So it's kind of my random thoughts by John tonight.
Okay, Ms. Miller, I now understand why it ticks you off when Mr. Marriott says scheme. Because 109 was not a scheme. But anyway. Okay, my turn. I like the idea that we put more of our energy into the earlier efforts with some of these, with the exception of the crack seal. I get more complaints when we go in and do crack seal because it looks ugly, right? That people say you've just, you've got this spider web of repair over the streets. So are we better off to put more energy into the seal coat and the chip seal, which isn't dramatically higher per lane mile, rather than the crack seal? Because it gives it people like their streets to look pretty,
Yeah.
right? And certainly you get that with overlay and mill and overlay, but that's at a huge cost. But the seal coat and the chip seal sort of does that too, doesn't it, or not?
I'm going to phone a friend with Mr. Dan Pumphrey to answer that.
My name is Dan Pumphrey, the streets manager.
Uh-huh.
The idea is to do the crack seal because that prevents the water from infiltrating the structure and, of course, causing havoc. And then the intent is within a year to do the seal coat, which gives a uniform appearance over top of the crack seal on the entire street, as well as the benefit of reducing the degradation from the sun, and it also creates somewhat of a seal on the surface.
Okay, so you would do that treatment pretty shortly after we make it look, well, obviously having the cracks is pretty ugly, but then doing the crack seal just sort of accentuates it in some ways. But then pretty shortly after doing the next phase, which gets it looking better again. Yeah,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Devitt.
Mr. Mayor, I think part of what we need to do is communicate better about what these practices are, when they're applied, why they're applied. And we've tried to do that, I think, on a community-wide basis. I think maybe one of the things we should challenge ourselves to do is to do it on a sector or neighborhood basis, so that when these applications are being applied in a certain area, the cluster, if you will, that we would inform people what we're doing and why we're doing it, and what the next steps are, and so forth. Like, for example, when we replaced all the concrete on Pomona Drive, the year following is when we did the actual asphalt work. And I think making sure that we communicate that on a area by area basis is something that we need to do better.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Ford?
I agree, Mr. Devon. In fact, as you were saying that, I was thinking that maybe we could get Ben involved in a little public information to say something to the effect that, to make people feel proud that their street is being fixed currently at a cost of, $15,000. I think actually our residents would be very happy to know that as a city that we're being very diligent about how we're spending their money, and to say that their road is being fixed at $15,000, per lane mile versus $214,000. I think people would probably be rather happy at the ugly look of that crack seal because it's a lot less money. But I think that's a public relations situation that maybe we could do a better job with, so people can truly understand cost and, how we're trying to save money for our residents.
Right. Okay, it looks like we're finally done with questions and comments. Thank you, Bert. It's a tough conversation. It is why Mr. Pfeiffer and I are down there scheming, trying to come up with another solution that would, at least the way we're looking at it right now on the proposals that are floating, they're not going to happen for a couple of years at the soonest. It would generate about $6 million to the city of Arvada. That would obviously make a big cut into what this issue is. Why don't we do a quick stand in place? for letting us get a quick stretch. Well, Mr. Devon, I think we can do away with the strategic plan. We just need to put every dollar into roads and.
Well, we will.
But we know we can't do that, and that's part of the battle that we have, is that there are other important priorities as well.
Yeah. So we just huddled quickly, and we believe what we heard from the council is that we should continue to offer you alternatives for how we can continue to increase our financial commitment to streets, and at some point in time, that might create a situation where we have to make some hard decisions, but at least we can start to come back and give you some sort of a plan to address that.
Very good. Yes, I think that's correct.
Okay. All right. The next item is an update on our City Council Strategic Plan, draft plan from 2020 to 2025. And Lori is going to present this information. I want to emphasize to the council that this is an iterative process. We believe we will be talking to you probably 3 or 4 times at least, in addition to tonight, about this strategic plan in preparation for 2020. And this is in part due to the fact that we're concluding our first 6-year time frame, and we're starting to launch into a second 6-year time frame. And as part of that, we've gone through had some intentional discussions with all of you about kind of looking into the future. So this is the first of what we expect will be multiple conversations, and Lori will present the information.
Good evening, Council. Thanks for your time on this tonight. One other important point I want to make is in the iterative process, it's important related to the retreat that if we have missed anything, this is our first draft, and we worked really hard to incorporate everything that you directed out of that conversation, and we supplemented based upon what we heard from your discussion. But there is plenty of time to say we'd like this added, this needs to change, etc. So know that as we go on into the rest of the year. So as a reminder, you adopted, or previous council adopted, the 2014 to 2019 strategic plan. Council implemented a very important best practice and discussed that plan every year. So it was adopted in June of 2013, and revisions were made pretty much annually to that plan. We give you updates every year as far as where we're at related to strategic results and anything changing on the radar that may need to be added into the strategic plan. In that strategic plan, by the time we got through to 2018, we have 5 priority areas. These are your priority areas. I'm going to go through those in just a minute. The strategic results outlined in the plan, I'm not going to read everything to you, but it really directs what we do and how we do it and how we allocate resources, what services are provided, and to some degree how they're provided, and what are the important things in a 6-year time frame. Focus is a very important part related to this, as this is our performance measures, and this is our financial, budgetary, strategic planning process that we go through to ensure funds are spent as directed. The 5 priority areas, all of which are very familiar to you: safe community, infrastructure, community and economic development, vibrant community and neighborhoods, organizational and service effectiveness. This is what you heard from your community in the engagement process. It was reconfirmed for this next year, this next strategic plan. For this draft strategic plan, we had significant community engagement. You received that information prior to the retreat, and you've been receiving it all year in the discussions that you have with the community. The City Council Strategic Retreat in January was a time where you all came together and had discussions about what those strategic priority areas and priorities are. And we took what we heard from you at that retreat and provided you with the draft strategic plan. The guiding themes that you heard from your community, from our community, is that they embrace small town traditions. That quality of life, of course, is a priority. Community wants to have a safe, effective, and efficient transportation system, and they want that full range of municipal services. In the strategic plan, I do want to step back and walk through the terminology. I have to share with you, staff spent a lot of time about what the terminology would be, so it could make sense to our community, but also aligned with what was being directed by council. So the priorities, those are our 5 priority areas that you have directed. Principles are the standards that we meet as we do the work and the way that we do our work. Strategic results, now that's a familiar term because they were included in our previous strategic plan. We've added milestones as a way so we can demonstrate progress in meeting the strategic results and the priorities. And then, of course, performance measures have been in play for several years now. Any questions on any of that?
Don't see any questions.
We've taken our alignment to a new level, and this is really important because as you have directed and as we have been working with our team, we want all of our employees to be able to align with the priorities that are directed by City Council and asked for by our community. So you can see that we have individual performance goals. I'm going to start at the bottom and work up. So individual performance goals are goals that are given to our employees so that they can see their connections, which line with either performance measures or milestones or principles or priority areas. So our individual employees can see how they contribute to the council's strategic priorities. Milestones, again, are showing progress towards those strategic results, and principles, and the priorities, then again, are the priority areas. For every strategic results, we've been working as a team to align to those strategic results. So every department head is working with their staff to see their connection alignment. So this is a really important tool at the staff level. So next steps, we are still working on our strategic results. You'll see in the draft that you received, we still have work to do and some clarity as far as alignment and the definitions between where a strategic result lies versus a milestone versus a performance measure. We will eventually adopt the strategic results by resolution. We're putting all this information, into ClearPoint. Again, we're aligning our employees' performance measures. We are beefing up that dashboard. I know Councilmember Pfeiffer likes that dashboard, and we're making a lot of progress there, so it will be more readily available to our community. We're monitoring progress, and of course, our mission, delivering superior services to enhance the lives of everyone in our community. And that concludes the presentation. I would ask now if you have any specific questions related to what you've been provided in the draft strategic plan, or if you have areas where we need to provide more clarity or anything we missed.
Why don't you provide a little better description? What is ClearPoint for the listening public?
Okay.
And as a reminder to some of us up here.
Okay. ClearPoint is the tool that we use to manage performance for the city. So all of our strategic results are entered into ClearPoint and tracked with individual milestones and progress that needs to be made. So when we provide you an update on the strategic plan, we're actually going to ClearPoint to look at updates as far as where things are at. It set expectations, it sets owners and roles and collaborators.
And when should we expect to see some of the new strategic results? What time frame are we looking at?
Some of the strategic results are in the draft that you received. Mm-hmm. And I would actually say the majority. But as leadership team have continued their discussions with the departments, we're actually seeing some additional need for some additional strategic results. So this is the first iteration. Main question here, is there anything that you see that's missing? And also letting you know staff is still doing some cleaning up and revisiting as far as where each strategic result aligns.
Okay. One thing that we talked about at the retreat that I'd like to see implemented is we talked about setting up a new one of our ad hoc committees with regard to smart cities, sort of the technology aspect of it. So are we moving forward with that?
Absolutely. There is work underway related to smart cities. What we have had several discussions on is it's a large scope project, and we want to make it manageable, kind of the eating an elephant one bite at a time. So we have narrowed our focus down to 2 key areas, which we'll be bringing forward in our update to council. Okay. One has to do with a specific area of traffic management, and then the other has to do with, I'm drawing a blank. and I don't have a friend to phone. We have two specific. One is
Okay.
specifically traffic
Because I've got
management.
several council members who are going to arm wrestle to serve on the committee. So,
Is there a committee?
The committee's not formed yet.
I
We're,
mean, that's.
yeah, we just didn't tell you about it. You're
Well,
not
no,
on it.
no, because I hear her talking about the project she wants to work on, but I didn't hear anything about a committee being involved
Right.
yet, so.
committee is not involved yet. We've been trying to get our arms around what's manageable and what information that we have. So the committee piece, there's an internal committee right now forming to talk about how to move that forward.
What about the committee that council wants to form? That we
Abs-
brought up at the retreat?
Absolutely will be coming forward.
That's going to be one of these strategic results for 2020 to 2025. So
Okay.
we're in the process of working on that.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. We were not keeping you out. We just haven't been ready. We realized internally we weren't as organized as we needed to be.
Yeah. We believe that a council committee on this focus would be very beneficial to us.
We do too. We do too. Okay, are there any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Ms. Ford.
I'm not going to ask all of them, but I'll just ask one that I have here. So, for example, it said by 12/20, implement a plan that outlines strategies to enhance positive police and community interaction. I was always under the impression that part of our neighborhood engagement plan was a big part of that. Or what kind of a plan are we thinking there?
Which priority area?
This is under safe community. So it'd be on page 8, and it's under, by 12/20, public safety will implement community engagement and education plan.
One thing that we know from our discussions right now, especially with the addition of Ben Irwin, is our engagement is not just in one department, although overall citywide engagement will be led in the communications office. We have engagement components within all areas, vibrant neighborhoods and communities, safe community. So those different departments are talking to formulate a plan. The overarching engagement plan will be in the communications office, and then there's discussions to align those all together. But I will also say that the police department has specific actions that they are planning related to engaging the community, related to public safety.
Okay.
Ms. Miller.
I just have one quick question that I didn't find in here. Mr. Irwin, this may be for you or Ms. Gillis. So we've talked a lot about marketing, communications, and engagement. I know Speak Up Arvada and our neighborhood engagement, but also we talked about interactive kiosks and really places where throughout the city where people can, touch a kiosk and find out what's going on in East Arvada if they're in West Arvada, and if they're in, vice versa. Where are parks? What's going on at the Arvada Center? What's going on in Old Town? What festivals are coming up? Things like that. So really everybody can find out what's going on whenever they want to.
Do you want me to go? You.
Hi, Council. This is Ben Irwin, the Communication Manager. And I think that where we're at right now is we want to establish a strategy and a discipline, and one of the main fundamentals of that is meeting people where they are and engaging them where they are. And so finding location-based ways of distributing information and offering information about what's happening in the city, ways to ask questions and to orient themselves to different parts of the city is going to be a priority. And I think technology is going to be a big piece of that. But right now, at least where we are at the current moment is establishing what the overarching strategy will be across the city and across all of our different tools and channels that we have. And then once we have that established, I think we'll be better positioned to explore some of those other technological pieces. Part of it is assessing what we already are doing and what the tools that we have. Are we maximizing those? Are we learning as much as we can from the tools that we have? And so we're really focusing on that in the short term. And the hope in presenting council with a communication and engagement plan later this year is to be able to not only assess where we're at and talk about short-term plans, but also start to explore some of those technological components or other opportunities that we might have at places like Old Town or other parts of the city to orient people to their community.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Thank you.
Thank
Keep
you.
working.
Okay.
It's a long process. Next, speaking of process. We have process improvement presentation with regard to our police vehicles. Mr. Devon.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we have, they're moving towards the front. Our process improvement team that worked on this engagement around our police vehicles, and I believe we will have for tonight the head ninja of the group, Ezekiel Vasquez, whose daytime job is revenue manager for the finance department. He will be leading this, or at least introducing and leading this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Devon. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. My name is Ezekiel, and I am a member of the process improvement team, the Process Improvement Ninjas, and we're really excited to be here tonight. We are going to talk to you about, we're going to give you a high-level overview of a project that we recently completed. This project involved the police department's fleet of vehicles, and we have a pretty diverse group of folks here, and I just want to take a quick second to introduce the folks and tell you about the different work areas that they represent. So we have here Gino Hohola and Dale Carabetta, and they work in the fleet work system, in the fleet program. We also have Barb Morger. She's from the city manager's office and also a process improvement ninja. We have Sergeant Gabe Evans and Commander Anthony Barros from the police department, and we have Amy Stores from our IT department. So with that, we're going to let Barb get us going with an overview of the Ninja team. And Ben, if you could please help me out here, I think thank you.
The Ninja team consists of 9 individuals with diverse skills and dynamic personalities. The members are from City Attorney's Office, Community and Economic Development Work System, City Manager's Office, Finance, IT, Parks, Golf, and Hospitality, Ralston House, and Utilities. We are trained in lean tools and techniques from Denver Peak Academy, and we dedicate time outside of our daily work tasks to facilitate process improvement across the organization. To date, we have completed 18 process improvement events with results of significant efficiency savings to the city. We have also recently created and launched process improvement courses, and our first class graduated February 2019. Ben, if you could show the picture. And this is the picture of the PD Fleet IT Process Improvement Team along with the Ninjas, and this was 2 days, 20 people ready for change.
Good evening, Council. So what was our need for change? We had 9 areas that were concerns throughout the group and why this change needed to take effect. Not enough cars to sufficiently support current PD staff. And with having to take some of those cars off of the road to perform maintenance and technological issues and repairs, created more problems than having enough vehicles to support PD. We had lack of redundancy in several critical positions, especially in IT and fleet, having backups in order to make those repairs when the primary folks were out of the buildings or out of the offices. We had inconsistencies on how the sectors assign their cars and vehicles. Some may have specific assigned vehicles per staff, or it was kind of a free-for-all, grab whatever's available. So a little inconsistent how that worked. We had some folks that have no clear understanding on how the fleet replacement fund worked, what was covered in that fund, what types of additional equipment besides vehicles were covered in that fund. Inconsistency and conservative process of entering tickets into our maintenance request softwares, i.e. Fleet runs on faster. Amy, what is the term for? Sharewell. There was some confusion by officers on which part of the car was associated with IT, which was actually associated with fleet. And another area where we found that there were standards and a lacking of training passed on to the officers as far as how to take care of the cars and how the technology functioned, right down to even how to fuel the vehicle. Too much time was spent by staff, not only from IT, but fleet as well, trying to track cars down and shuttling cars, trying to make these fixes and repairs that were needed. And we found that police personnel were often driving their own vehicles for training and meetings at times when no PD vehicles were available. So diving into a lot of this, we came up with these matrix. Current state, after looking through all of this, we found that 909.22 days for an average maintenance process. Now this is worst case scenario. This is looking at not only what we did internally, but looking at what was done outside at dealerships, body shops, that type of thing, and working with their schedules. The process for purchasing and building a vehicle, a lot of folks were unaware that this could take anywhere from 13.5 months to 14.5 just to get the prototype out of a new vehicle and changes. Our fuel system currently drives the maintenance schedules, and we had a large number of errors being entered into the fuel system, be it mileage or wrong key use, that would skew our maintenance intervals. We have 66 patrol officers currently, only 36 marked patrol cars. So a shortage of cars even not being fully staffed. Along with that, we're also, Amy and IT have 366 mobile devices that we need to maintain throughout these vehicles. So the future state in identifying the roadblocks, bottlenecks that we had going through the process improvement, we were able to get, by just clearing up how a vehicle is entered and a service request is made, getting those to the right folks, we were at 6.21 days for the average maintenance. That also is worst case scenario, including the outside body shops, dealers, that type of folks. Let's see, on the errors, we can reduce that 5% just by getting the right mileages entered in, using the right key. We've already accomplished this, and we've way surpassed it. We're at like 1% on the errors right now. Fully staffed, we would have 72 officers and 43 patrol cars, still at a 60% ratio. Money down at the bottom is the big one. Average car right now, current 60,000, that's fully equipped, and that's going to do nothing but grow. Okay.
Mr. McGough?
Yes, would you back up to the first box under future estate?
Yep.
The last couple lines there indicate that there a 2-month saving if council approval is not required for the purchase process.
Yep.
Do we have a recommendation coming to council concerning that, or?
Part of it is associated with the ordinance changes for that have already been included, and part of it is associated with some additional ordinance changes that we'll be recommending to you in the future.
Yes, because we did make changes
Right.
on where the authorization needs to come, council or manager or department heads.
Correct.
So there will be some more coming to us?
Yes.
Okay. So, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Council, my name's Gino. I'm a supervisor with Fleet. I was involved in this process as well, and some of the outcomes Dale kind of spoke about a little bit, but we knew that we needed more vehicles, and that was accomplished. And then we knew we needed somebody to help us work on these vehicles, which was also accomplished with a dedicated position for that. And then at that being, we realized Amy needed some help too. So those are additional resources that we've added. We've also, we got a single point of entry now for repair, and what that is the officers can, on any shift, no matter what time it is, they can enter this information into the program that Amy's going to talk about a little bit later, and then when we come in, it's just a much better way of communicating. We know it's there, we can go get it, we can fix it, and so on. And then with all that stuff we did, we realized we needed some more officer training. So we did some videos and whatnot with that, and Gabe's going to talk about that a little bit, and then we came up with a battle rhythm to follow so we could continue to do this. So.
Join in with Gino on this one a little bit. This next shot, if you'll bring it up, is an interceptor in process. And I know Councilman Pfeiffer, you've been involved in this for a little bit. You've seen us start one, complete one. This is about midway through the process. We'll get a plain police interceptor. We will strip all of the interior out. We will go in and put every component, not only to make the lighting work, radios work, but all of the IT and information systems that are required by PD now.
Very intense project. If you guys ever want to come out and look at it, please do.
All right. Hi, Council. Amy from IT. So the ride system that Gino mentioned is actually originally was a whiteboard. So officers would go up to the whiteboard, mark if there was an issue, and just write IT or fleet. So you had no idea. That could be an engine problem, that could be the computer didn't turn on, that could be a fuse. Your guess is as good as mine. So it was updated by officers. If it was correct at swings, by the time you got to days the next day, was it the same information? Your guess is as good as mine. So that was the issue we had with the board. And then, of course, the only way to see the board was to go to the substation. So you'd go to the substation every day, once a week, depending on workload, and Fleet would see what I saw. We would try to talk to each other, so nobody had a good understanding of what was actually wrong with the vehicles. So it was a lot of time, a lot of effort to get not just the personnel, but then you had to arrange for the car to be there. Sometimes the car was there, sometimes it was not. So it was very manual, and it was not working real well. So the new digital board is what kind of came out of the process. So basically this board in the background, they can enter in to one location. It's all web-based. They can do it from a smartphone, from their computers in the car. They can enter in either IT ticket or a fleet ticket in the same location. It automatically goes into the Sharewell or the Fleet Faster and alerts both of us, both departments simultaneously. And then also it changes color based off of the status of the car. So green, you're good to go, you can drive it. Blue, it needs some service. So please check and see if Fleet's gonna pick up that car today. If it's yellow, hey, it's got an IT issue. You might want to check with your sergeant, see if it's a keyboard. Maybe you could take it. Hey, you know what? Maybe the whole computer's gone. Don't take that car. And red, don't take that car. Maybe it's got an engine problem. Maybe it's got something else wrong with it, but don't take that car. So this has helped us. One, when we go back to get a car to fix it, it's actually available now, which is awesome. We don't have officers taking cars that don't work or out in the field. Something is wrong. So we can always see in an instant from any place what's going on with the car, and it's made it a lot more efficient. So, good.
Good evening. My name is Anthony Barros. At the time of this process, I was serving in the Administration Bureau, and I was basically an admin. They're in charge of part of that is training. So why was training needed? They kind of mentioned it, but from the police department's perspective, some of us have been around a long time and some rotate in and out of different assignments, so it might be several years before they drive the patrol vehicle. Or we originally started on a Crown Vic and now we've kind of upgraded, or some different builds take place. And so some of the officers just weren't familiar with what it took to maybe operate the new vehicles or the systems that were in there. They're very, throughout time they change and they do become more complex and they add more features which some of our officers didn't know about. Additionally, there is a video. We did put together training for RIDE, so that way our officers would know how to better utilize that. But also, I believe that it took training on everybody's part, not just our part. It was a big collaboration. Fleet also had to train their individuals on how to effectively use RIDE, and so did Amy. I think overall the collaboration and partnership worked well. fleet came together and we kind of made a list of some things that they thought would be important for us to know. For example, we have this video, which I'll play in one moment, which is talking about fueling, which we use a different identification number for our officers than what is typically needed for the gas pumps. As a result, if we put that in wrong, or even anybody else in the city puts in the number wrong, that would add increased time on fleet. So, for example, if we could correct an issue on the front end for IT or fleet, that might take us 3 to 5 minutes. It might save them, 30 minutes, an hour, several hours down the road. Throughout the year, that increases efficiency. So this is one of the videos that Fleet put together with our media services. So.
Hi, I'm Caleb Barron with Fleet Maintenance. Today we're going to run through properly using the fuel system to get the vehicles fueled properly, save you time. This also helps us track mileage on the vehicles when they need due for service, helps us not pull vehicles from service when they are not due, to keep the accuracy on board and on track, and help us keep our maintenance items on schedule. Usually, the fuel key is located here. Other times, keys are located in the glove box. I've also found them in the sunglasses pocket, and other times, some officers will put them above the visor. If you cannot find the key for the vehicle, please contact your sergeant immediately and have him contact Fleet immediately so we can get the right key back to the right car. Okay, first step in fueling the car is getting the correct mileage off the vehicle, 98,502. Do not record the tenths, not the 7. Next, we're going to enter the fuel shack with the fuel key. All right, next we're going to insert the fuel key into the fuel system. The little bump needs to go up. Hold it for a second, then put your user ID in, which is your employee number, not your badge number. It is important to remember when entering your employee number into the fuel system, the employee number is not the same as your badge number. Your employee number should be found on your pay stub in the upper left. The employee number actually helps us locate missing or lost keys if they do go missing. Next, you enter the odometer number, 98502, enter. Next, you will reinsert your fuel key. Then you need to select your fuel pump. We're in front of 3 or 4, whichever is not being used. We'll use 3, enter, and that will activate the dispenser. Sometimes when you enter your mileage, it will tell you the mileage is invalid or incorrect. If that's the case, go ahead and re-enter the same mileage as you did before, and it should at that point accept the mileage and you continue as normal. If you forget any of these steps, there is a step-by-step procedure here on the wall next to the fuel master. So we picked fuel pump 3. Remove the nozzle, flip the lever, and begin fueling. After you've finished fueling, please do not pass the nozzle. This will mess up the vehicle mileage on this vehicle, and we will lose track of where it should be as far as its scheduled maintenance. When you're done fueling, please put the key back in the vehicle. Each key is specific to the vehicle.
Caleb, I've just run the scheduled maintenance due report, and we have a couple more vehicles that have showed up due for service that we'll be bringing in to you this afternoon.
Okay, very good.
All right.
This is the service list we run. It's imperative that the mileage is accurate and it's input accurately at the fuel system so that we get our scheduled maintenance due on time and can minimize downtime for the vehicles. That's fueling with our fuel system in a nutshell. If you have any other problems, it won't fuel, can't fuel, the key has an issue, or you can't find the key, contact Tom Morahan at 7703.
So it may seem simplistic and very basic, especially if you put gas in the vehicles here at the city before, but this is for our beginning level officers up to our senior officers as well. So we can show that to newer officers as they come into mini skills. They know what these are, they know what type of errors they might encounter, they know what the vehicle gas fuel key would look like, and those types of things. So this training is currently stored in our training system, our what we call our DMS, but we'll also re-emphasize this at our upcoming annual vehicle training here in the spring. and summertime. So with that, I will be followed by Sergeant Evans.
Good evening, Council. Again, Sergeant Evans with the Police Department. I'm a patrol supervisor. I was also involved in this fleet improvement process. And obviously, there were a lot of nuts and bolts that we dived down into to try to increase the efficiency of how we get vehicles and then keep those vehicles in service. But obviously, the greatest plan in the world isn't going to do so well if you don't have an effective way to implement it and then sustain it. So with 4 primary departments that are stakeholders in this process, the PD, Fleet, IT, and then Finance, we had to come up with some sort of way to get us all on the same page and figure out where the key deadlines and the key points were where we needed to be communicating back and forth and sharing information. So I spent 10 years in the Army. We called it a battle rhythm there. I called it an acquisition cycle here. But basically what this is a reoccurring cycle that highlights the points throughout the year at which specific information has to be passed back and forth between the departments. One of the things that surprised me the most probably going through this process was how long it took to actually go from we need more police cars to getting approval to buy the cars, actually placing the order, having the cars come in, and then for Fleet and IT to go through and actually construct the vehicle for us. So all in all, the process takes more than a year, and this cycle here pretty much captures all the key points in that cycle where information has to be exchanged so that we can keep the process on time and on target in order to get a vehicle on the roads within the reasonable amount of time. So, next slide. And again, communication in a process like this is key. So at the end of this, we had a lot of good ideas, and we decided we needed to capture these things in a durable format so that the information could be passed on just as the years go by and different people rotate in and out of different assignments. I learned a lot. Commander Barros learned a lot. Everybody that was involved with this learned a lot. But 3 to 5 years from now, we're all going to be in different assignments. You're going to have new folks that we need to get up to speed on these processes. So we created a lot of durable products in written format or digital format that we can use and update going on down the road. So we have the training videos. We have that acquisition cycle. We actually put together a written SOP. I know Fleet and IT have put together some products as well. And all of that is designed just to do what you've got up on the screen there, which is just maintain the standard that we've set, pass those lessons learned on, and then not have to reinvent the wheel every 5 or 7 years since we created durable products going forward. Next slide. Questions?
Yeah, so thank you, Sergeant Evans. I just want to add one more thing. And I think Commander Barros as well. So if you want to, please, Barros.
All in all, so it did create a more efficient system for all of our departments. And really what's that boiled down to for the city is less time spent doing other tasks such as searching down little numbers. But also it's a better stewardship of the equipment that you guys have provided to us, and also to help us be more efficient and be better prepared as an organization. So I think overall it worked out very beneficially. It opened up lines of communication that we still maintain today, and it made things more efficient. And we have a better understanding of their process, and I think they have a better understanding of where we come from. So just that understanding in general has built relationships and made the process continuing going forward much better. So.
Thank you, Commander. And just to add to that, on behalf of the Process Improvement Ninjas, we just want to express how proud we are of these guys. The Ninjas, we have the easy job. We come in and we facilitate and we help them work through things, but they did all the hard work. And this is really, it's proactive work. It's the type of work that we need right now. As you guys heard earlier, we need to come up with different funding sources, and any way that we can improve our processes, identify efficiencies, that's just going to help all the more with our funding issues. So thank you guys, and with that, do you have any questions?
We have a few. Mr. McGough, you're first.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say I'm very impressed with the work that you've done in bringing people together from the various work units to take a look at this problem. I just have a general question. Will the efficiencies and the information, the knowledge you've gained from this process, will it be extended to the vehicles throughout the system eventually? This is the police vehicles. Will it encompass all the other city vehicles too?
Yes, we are starting to look into that and see the benefit for going to, especially those like the DOT inspections, those who have those, knowing when they're due, when they're up, getting those in. So we do see it branching out.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mr. Marriott?
Thank you. This question's maybe a little tangential to the presentation you just got, but, and maybe it's for Mr. Devon. I know we have a policy as far as when we replace vehicles, police or otherwise, and I'm certain there's got to be lots of research on it, and we adopt a doctrine kind of how we do it. Do we look at that periodically? I know in my own personal life, my newest vehicle is so significantly different from one that was even 6 or 7 years old that I would imagine these kinds of things needs to change for us with our fleet stuff as well. Is that happening? Are we looking at that at a regular basis?
Yes, sir, we do. We visit that every year. We evaluate what's out there. Each new year of a vehicle brings on new challenges, and one currently that we're facing is a big change in the 2020 model year for the police interceptor. Realizing that, we moved forward and purchase some additional 2019 so we could be ahead of the curve, let the aftermarket catch up, let somebody else be the guinea pig for a change and wait for the measurements to come in on how things are going to fit in these cars. When we are ready for the 2020s, we'll have product available to put in them. So we do visit that every year.
And just roughly, how long do we keep police cars?
It depends on their usage and the mileage. Right now we're at about 6 years.
6 years, and how many miles does that end up being?
About
in 6 years?
125 to 130,000. So we're using that resource very well.
Right, and I would assume we take the equipment out of it when we go to surplus or get rid of the car. What's a 120,000 mile 6-year-old police car worth when we?
About $3,500.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Why do I know somebody who will probably try to buy some of those? He's always needing more cars for his collection. Mr. Pfeiffer?
Well, first, I know how much it takes to get into those vehicles as I spent that time out there. I mean, you completely gut it and replace it, both for your team as well as IT. So it's a lot of work, but what I appreciate most is that was all done in-house, and the brain trust is right here in the room, and you save a taxpayer a lot of money by being innovative as well as servicing the user of that vehicle to accommodate what they need, the police officers. So again, appreciate that. And this lean process, like, we should always see these. I think these are great. I don't know how often we've seen these, but you know, my brain's not working tonight, and I have my glasses. I don't, you know, this time you think I would remember things, but this is great stories, and we need to continue to hear them. And this is a good example of being good stewards of the taxpayers' money, as well as our assets, as well as having employee engagement. I mean, at the end of the day, that's great. The question I do have about this is, how does somebody come up with an idea and then engage the ninjas? What's that process in general? You know, if I was a department, whatever, and I have a problem, how can you walk maybe ourselves and the public into how they engage and then what's expected?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Councilmember Pfeiffer, for the compliment. We really enjoy this type of work. And to answer your question, we do have a process to solicit process improvement projects, and it is in the form of a Google form that a user would fill out and submit, and they would identify their ideas, and they'd send that through to the ninjas, and we'd look at it, and we'd kind of vet it and figure out if it would be something that would work, and if it's worth our time and energy.
Well, it's a great job, and keep up the great work. I do appreciate it, because I know it's above and beyond your normal daily tasks, correct? So, you know,
Yes.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Couple of things. Are we doing any kind of analysis of what kind of cost savings we have through each of these ninja successes?
Yes, we are, and Ezekiel, can you, the history of
Yes.
process improvements and what we have documented in terms of savings?
So roughly speaking, we started doing process improvement projects in about mid-2016, and since then, we've saved approximately $360,000 through these processes, and those are savings that occur year over year, so there'll be ongoing savings. And we are also, as Barb mentioned earlier, we're training more ninjas, more people in lean practices. So we're hoping that that number will really start to increase as other employees across the organization are able to kind of do their own mini lean projects and lean improvements.
And I would say 300 and some change or $400,000, that's just a hard dollar. Think of the ease to the employee and the improved efficiencies and all the offshoots that are not hard dollars. That's great. I think there's a lot more value in there than the dollars. So give yourself more credit than that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think we need to update our fuel pumps at some point. Those look like they came from the 70s, don't they?
Those are new, Mr. Mayor.
Those are new?
Those are the simple version.
Oh, the simple version. I see. I see. And tell Mitch Kanjar he doesn't get paid royalties, if you'll pass that on. Very good. This is exciting stuff. What I love is the collaboration that's going on, and just the, it breaks down silos. I mean, it really does do a great job of getting, all the different disciplines working well together, and we've got such an incredible team that it's absolutely wonderful to see you all with this kind of success. So thank you. Thank you for your hard work. Okay, very good. One last one. We're going to talk about the 50-meter natatorium.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Lori Gillis will again take the lead on presenting this discussion and these questions that we'd appreciate any feedback you'd like to give us on.
It's me again. I'm never up here, and we're twice in one night. Mr. Rusink had to go catch a plane, so I'm subbing. Anyway, you received the update in your packet. Again, this is an update on the Myers Pool replacement project, and we are referring to that as the 50-meter natatorium replacement. As a reminder, this is a intergovernmental project with City of Arvada, Jeffco Public Schools, and Apex. And the project has been going well because of the great partnerships that we have as agencies. We provided 8 key actions that are in play, and I'm going to walk through those really quickly and then jump back to an area for feedback. But the key action areas are, number 1, keep the existing Myers Pool open from 2019 to 2021, and that is an effort because we have things we need to take care of at that pool. Developing a communication and engagement plan, which Mr. Irwin is working on with the team. We are also working on a feasibility study, which this is a step I want to come back to in just a minute. We plan to get through most of that study in May. We need to develop an intergovernmental agreement, and that is in process. Pretty much all of these things are in process together. We are talking and looking at strategies related to a private placement funding. We had meetings early on, and we believe that that will not be a problem, working with Jeffco Public Schools. And then we're working on the design. And then ultimately we'll be constructing from 2020 to 2021, and then the opening being in 2021. With a $35 million project, we believe it is really important to keep you informed and aware of what is going on related to these steps. I also want to mention that Mayor Pro Tem Marriott and Councilmember Pfeiffer are both part of the coordinating committee, so they're up to speed on all that's happening with this project. But in the council report, if you go back to action item 3, there were 4 bullets seeking any input. And I can read those and we can walk through them, or I can just ask if you have input that you'd like to provide in those areas.
Does anybody have any items they want to specifically go to? I'm not seeing any lights.
Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Yes.
One of the, I think, issues that I want to make sure we have some dialogue with council regarding is the proposed sites. And perhaps Lori was going to talk about those right now, or am I jumping ahead of you?
You go right ahead. I had a little thing written down here. But
okay. We've identified multiple sites, one of which is the current Myers Pool site. Also Gibbs West Community Park, the Apex Center adjacent area. the North Area Athletic Complex, or Panorama Park, which is in the vicinity of West 89th Drive and Gladiola Street, kind of think the Whisper Creek Community Station area. And you can see, well, as I went through those sites, you could see them depicted on the visual up there. That's something that I think is I think pretty important for us to narrow down fairly soon, so that we can make some assumptions around construction costs and so forth. And what I would like to ask is, does the council, does council have any particular concerns or preferences regarding the sites? One of the concerns I think staff has is that if we're going to be able to continue to provide the current users of Myers Pool with a competitive aquatics facility to utilize until the new pool is built, we would need to continue to provide, keep Myers Pool operational through 2021. If we were to start construction, we would have to literally demolish Myers Pool, and then the current users of Myers Pool would have to find some other 50-meter aquatic facility, which some of you may recall when Myers Pool was out of commission back in 2012, 2013, I think it was. They had a hard time finding a place to actually, North Jeffco swim team and the high schools to find a place to actually utilize to work out and hold swim meets and so forth. So I would urge probably that we think of that if we are thinking about trying to replace it at the current site. I think the other sites work fine. I think Apex has expressed some preference towards the current site at their recreation center. So we really appreciate receiving some feedback from you on that.
Okay, Mr. Marion?
Thank you. That's just what I was going to give you feedback on. I think it's really important that the current Myers Pool can stay open provided the building is safe to be in while this new facility is being created. So I would not favor that existing site for both that reason and that it's really not big enough to handle a new facility with the parking that comes with it without really impeding on the neighbors there. So I wouldn't favor that site. Personally, I prefer the Gibbs West Park site because it is the closest to the center of Arvada as far as servicing really all the population around here as best we can. This is moving a recreational amenity from towards the eastern side of Arvada westward, and I think moving it less far westward, it has some benefit to it. And then I think the operational efficiencies that Apex gets with having its Apex Center and since they're going to operate this facility in close proximity also is an important factor. So of all these possibilities, I would lean pretty strongly towards the Gibbs West Park site as being the place I would like to see it go.
Mr. McGough.
Yes, thank you. Speak a little bit to that point. Recognizing that Myers Pool is not just a recreation center, it's really, a competitive swim facility or aquatic facility. I think still I'm hoping that as the site is determined, I agree that probably has to go to one of the sites other than the current Myers Pool site. I'm hoping the consultants will also take a look at the users and the possible new users and be thinking about how do we move people from, from the east side to the west side. There's particularly young people who might, right there in our, the access from the various schools and so forth. So just that the access needs to be part of that consultant evaluation. So, but I do recognize that it will be further west than it is currently, very likely.
Mr. Jones.
Is there any available land on the east side or more central than even the Gibbs West property?
No. I mean, without, I think, looking at something that, would be, I think, an issue for our community, and.
Like the Pomona parcel?
Well, in my opinion, Pomona parcel's off the table.
I'm just kidding. I just wanted to see if Nancy would give me any recognition on that.
Well, I was more worried about how I would answer what Nancy would do to me, depending on my answer. So, there another site that would, I think, require a policy decision and re-engagement of the community, is if we were even going to consider, and I would not recommend that we even consider this, but the southern property of the Arvada Center. But again, we have a council policy that says that's going to be dedicated to the arts. And we've gone through that before with possibly building something there back in, I think it was 2013, and concluded not to do it. So from my standpoint as staff, I consider that a parcel that we can't consider, just like the Pomona parcel. Right. So we've done that calculation and have determined that there really is not a site in the eastern portion of the city that would work, which is why we've identified the sites here.
And you may or may not have this information handy, but of the users, of the recreational users, because I know there's a lot of schools and competitive teams that use it, and they're probably traveling in from distances anyway. But from the neighborhood perspective and removing this amenity from its current location, do we have any idea what the impact is on kind of the local neighborhood usage?
So. The local neighborhood usage, I believe, is fairly small. The usage that has been presented to me by Apex and others that are associated with the operation of the current Myers Pool is that it is used primarily by organized groups such as the North Jeffco swim team or the high schools, and that a lot of the other programmed use tends to be scheduled kinds of classes or things along those lines that most people are driving to. They're actually, in some cases, there's for example, there's organized lap swim by both adults and youth that people actually drive to. There's not a lot of people that walk up to the current site to utilize. There are some, I'm sure, but most is scheduled along those lines.
Okay. Well, and like the others, I would prefer to keep the current Myers Pool in operation as long as possible, and not tear this one down and rebuild it on the same spot. I think that puts everybody at a disadvantage. I would hope that from a location perspective, I think, as Mr. Marriott indicated, the site there at the Gibbs West property is probably one of the best places, if not there, out towards the NAC. Just given that the nature of that complex is sports related and sports oriented, there's sufficient or will be sufficient need for parking, and so that could certainly accommodate those. But again, that amenity on kind of on that side of town, I don't know if there's any thoughts about what will replace or what will go where the current Myers Pool is today, and what will take that site in the future.
Yeah, Councilmember Jones, I believe that's a future discussion that we're going to have once we make the determination of the site. And we should engage the neighborhood,
Right.
along with, as we consider those options.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Pfeiffer.
So they all have pluses and minuses. I mean, I agree, it should stay up while we're building. I agree with that. It saddens me a little bit that this amenity will leave this part of the city because of the Pomona parcel. I think that the reason that was held was for things like this, but the entire community will lose out because of maybe that part of the community. Is resistance to anything on that land. So that's unfortunate. The only issue I have with, there's positives and negatives of each of the other locations. The one over at the Apex Center, the issue with that one is it's roads that will encourage more traffic, you know, Ward and 72nd that are today not designed for additional traffic because it is a regional facility that will draw, you know, people from possibly across the state, depending on the meet, I guess. So I'm a little concerned that our system there is not set up to handle additional traffic on top of the plan for the site as well. Also, there's no amenities there either. I get concerned that we have people come in for these long days and there's nowhere to eat, nowhere to grab. There's a little snack bar inside there, but there's already pools there on that site. So then you start looking at, well, what about the areas that can service? Well, if you go out to the NAC, I think that makes logical sense, exactly what Mr. Jones says, but again, no amenities out there that today the current Myers has, like restaurants and so forth, shopping or whatever. Because that's sometimes what we were driving around the Lutz Field and Stenger. So if we keep with the theme of regionalism around our sports complex, we should keep that in mind. And then up towards Whisper Creek, what is good, there is amenities up there, and it is by larger roads, like Highway 93 is, like with the NAC, but the Jefferson Parkway, you have Indiana, you have Highway 72, all converging in that area. That makes sense. So I know they all have positives and negatives, but we should be thoughtful of who's coming, how does it impact it, do we need two pools on one site? I get one's a competitive pool, but you know, what does Candelas have or Lion Rock have? You know, what does the western side have? They don't have a pool that they can use like Meyer does for lessons and other things. So I know that's a lot to put out there, but those are things I would want us to consider as we work through the sites. I didn't give you an answer to which one would be the favorite, but I think there's something we have to work through.
I think it's a fair question. A lot of the questions you ask are very fair questions. I know that for many of the large swim meets, both the youth and high school, some of the food beverage kinds of things is taken care of by boosters or by supporters of those youth sports organizations that I think utilize some of that activity as fundraisers to help support their you know, their activities. So some of that is I think addressed by that. The other issue, and certainly if we study the Apex site with a little bit more detail, I believe we did build in some of the traffic improvements for additional use in the future in terms of turn lanes and signalized intersections and things like that. So there may be some data that we should supply you and perhaps the Apex board and the school board around that issue. But the feeling is that when the Apex Center was built, there was some assumption of some additional use, some additional traffic capacity that was built into the to West 72nd Avenue that would handle some additional use along those lines.
But that's just right in front. We still have a bottleneck right at Ward and 72nd. You have Sims to Ward. It's not improved. You know, keep that in mind. There's Ward Road is still 2 lanes technically. You know, and I think most people are going to be coming from the closest interstate, which means Ward will get more traffic. So I think we should probably think through how do people commute there and come back versus the other 2 sites where there's highways within a quarter mile.
Okay, I concur. Go ahead, Nancy.
Well, I was just going to say in the strategic planning, there was a tile, if you will, that talked about having community engagement regarding the Myers Pool and what would go there once the new one is purchased. So is it possible that we could incorporate that engagement also with maybe some feedback on where current users would prefer the pool? The new one.
Yes, I believe we can. Some of that engagement is occurring right now with respect to the North Jeffco swim team and the high school teams as the primary users. So I think there's an opportunity for more engagement there.
And I just had a question just to verify the ownership of the new pool, the new Myers Pool. How will that look then with Apex doing the maintenance and management of it? and then Jefferson County Schools will be paying for it or find the funding. So in terms of who owns the pool then, how does that change?
I believe we would be the owners of the pool.
We would still own the pool?
We would still own the pool.
And some of that will be dictated by the financing how the financing is structured with Jeffco Public Schools. So
Okay.
the goal is to get to where we're at with the current pool,
Mhm.
and it will depend on the financing structure.
Okay, thank you.
Can I also add, your questions are really good because you did provide the input that we were asking for that we can look at when we develop the rest of the operational feasibility study. So we will have information for you on that.
Even though Mr. Marriott was referring to funding of roads as a scheme, I agree with his points on this issue tonight, so. Anything else you need from us, Mr.?
No, we've received tremendous input from all of you tonight. We're good.
If that's what you want to call it. Okay, thank you. Good night, everybody.